The last thing Zola saw before the world went dark was her phone screen. Not a face, not a hand reaching for her, just a screen, glowing with a transfer notification she had already processed in her head before her body decided it was done. She was standing in the elevator at work on a Wednesday, always a Wednesday, because Wednesdays were payroll days, the days she moved money into 3 different accounts before lunch, when her knees gave out from under her without warning. She reached for the rail and missed. The fluorescent ceiling rushed toward her. Someone shouted her name. And then nothing. When she woke up, there were tubes in her arm and a stranger asking her what year it was. Her grandmother Adiz was the only familiar face in the room. The old woman was sitting in the plastic chair beside the bed, still wearing her coat, her handbag clutched in both hands. She had not called ahead. She had not waited to be invited. She had simply come. Zola was 28 years old, and until that Wednesday, she had believed the most dangerous thing in her life was her bank balance. She was wrong. The doctors ran tests. Blood work, imaging, and scans. Adiz sat through all of it without complaint, without shifting in her chair, without once suggesting she had somewhere else to be. Zola texted her family from the hospital bed, her mother Celestine, her father, her brother Kofi, and her sister Nadia, and told them she had collapsed at work and was waiting on results. Celestine replied first. "Probably just stress," she said. "Drink more water." Kofi reacted with a thumbs up. Nadia sent a kissing face and told her to take care. Nobody came. 2 days later, a doctor walked into the room carrying a tablet and wearing the careful, neutral expression that doctors put on when they are about to say something that will divide a person's life into a before and an after. He sat down. He talked about imaging results in masses and what the scans were showing. Zola clung to the edges of his sentences, trying to make them sound smaller than they were. Then he said the word cancer. It landed like something dropped from a height, sharp and loud, even though his voice had stayed calm. Stage 3. Aggressive, but treatable. He kept talking, oncology referrals, treatment timelines, chemotherapy protocols. Zola nodded through all of it. Adiz had found her hand without either of them looking, and the old woman's fingers were trembling, though she was trying not to let it show. That night, Zola sent a message to the family group chat. She typed it slowly, reread it 3 times, and pressed send. "They think it's cancer. Stage 3. Starting treatment soon." The message sat there. Delivered. Read. Celestine replied 5 minutes later. "That's scary. Stay strong." Kofi said, "Wow." Nadia sent praying hands and a heart. That was all. Not "when can we come?" Not "what do you need?" Not "yet, we are on our way." Just words, the kind that cost nothing and weigh nothing, and dissolve the moment the screen goes dark. Zola called her parents one by one that night. Her mother gasped and said that's terrible. She said they would talk more tomorrow, and that it had just been such a long day. Her father took the phone briefly, told her to stay positive, said medicine was incredible these days, and said not to worry too much. Neither of them asked who was sitting with her. Neither of them asked where she was. 2 days after that, they announced the vacation. A resort with an ocean view. All-inclusive. The booking had been made months ago, Celestine explained. The deposit was non-refundable. Everyone needed to clear their heads. Stress was bad for everyone. Once they were back, they would figure out the next steps together. Zola stayed on the phone after the call ended, staring at the wall of her hospital room, the word "together" sitting in her chest like a stone. Then she opened her banking app and transferred money for the last-minute fee her mother had mentioned in passing at the end of the call. The booking was short. They were still her family. Sending money was simply what she had always done. To understand why that hurt as much as it did, you have to understand the life Zola had been living long before any doctor ever looked at her with sympathy. She woke up every morning at 5:12, not because she was disciplined, but because her alarm refused to snooze, and she was already calculating before her feet hit the floor. Electricity, internet, car insurance, Celestine's credit card minimum, Kofi's tuition, Nadia's phone upgrade. Her paycheck had other people's names on it before it ever landed in her account. She worked corporate during the day and freelance at night. Weekends were for emergency errands, side gigs, and phone calls that began with "I just need a little help this month." She never complained out loud. She told herself that was what family did. She told herself being dependable was a form of love. She told herself that one day, someone would turn around and notice how much she was carrying. Only one person ever did. Her grandmother Adiz, who called in the evenings with a voice that was soft and unhurried and never asked about money. She asked if Zola had eaten. She asked if she had slept. She said, "You are carrying too much," and Zola would laugh and say she was fine, and Adiz would make that small sound in her throat, the one that meant she did not believe a word of it, but had decided not to argue tonight. The body had tried to warn Zola long before that Wednesday. Dizzy spells at her desk. Cold sweats. A sharp, deep ache under her ribs that faded when she pressed hard enough against it. She blamed exhaustion. She blamed bad posture and too much coffee and not enough food. When you are the person everyone else leans on, you do not get sick. You do not slow down. You do not stop. Until the Wednesday you do. She had been replying to Nadia's message about a group trip deposit when her vision blurred, as if someone had smeared grease across the world, and her knees buckled beneath her. The rest had already been told. Adiz did not ask permission before she moved in. She simply appeared one afternoon with 2 worn suitcases, a grocery bag full of canned soup, and a folded blanket tucked under one arm. Zola opened the door expecting a visit. Instead, Adiz walked past her slowly and deliberately, set her bags down beside the couch, and said, "I am staying for a while." Zola told her she did not have to do that. That she was fine. That she could manage. Adiz turned around and looked at her with that calm, unmovable expression she had been perfecting for 73 years. "You do not have to manage everything by yourself anymore," she said. She took over the kitchen without making it obvious she was doing it. Soups appeared on the stove instead of frozen meals. Pill bottles lined up beside the sink with handwritten notes. "This one makes you sleepy. This one must be taken with food." Adiz woke before Zola on treatment days and pressed a thermos of hot broth into her hands at the door, as if warmth itself could be transferred from one body to another through the act of holding something. Chemo made everything feel slow and wrong at once. Food tasted like metal no matter what it was. Zola's joints ached in ways she had no words for. Her hair began coming out in the shower in soft, terrible clumps that clogged the drain and made her throat close when she looked at them too long. One morning Adiz stood behind her and brushed what was left so gently that Zola felt she might come apart from the tenderness of it. When the tears came, Adiz did not tell her to be strong. She did not say it was only hair or that it would grow back. She simply wrapped her arms around Zola from behind and held her while Zola stared at her own reflection, trying to find the woman she recognized somewhere inside the face looking back. The family called sometimes from wherever they were. Their voices were warm with sunshine and room service and tour schedules. "How are you doing?" "Fine," Zola said. "Hanging in there." "Good, good," they said. "Stay positive." And then they moved on to talking about snorkeling or a spa treatment or a restaurant that had been surprisingly good. One evening, while Zola sat at the kitchen table pushing soup around a bowl she could not bring herself to finish, Adiz sat down across from her, set a business card on the table between them, and slid it forward without a word. "A local attorney. Not to hurt anyone," she said quietly. "Just so you understand what belongs to you." Zola stared at the card for a long moment. 2 days later, Adiz drove her to a small office wedged between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. Zola sat in the waiting room feeling like a traitor, like she was sneaking around behind the backs of people who had already walked away from her without looking back. The lawyer was younger than expected, with tired eyes and a careful voice. He spread the paperwork across his desk and asked precise, gentle questions. Zola answered in a rush, explaining the bills and the loans and the deposits and the car titles, explaining how she had never thought of any of it as ownership, because they were family, because she had only been helping, because it was easier not to look too closely at what the numbers actually meant when you lined them all up together. He listened. He nodded. Then he said, legally, most of this is hers. Not shared. Not half. Hers. He pointed to the lease. The car title. The bank accounts. The loan documents. Her name was the only one that appeared on any of them. He explained what would happen if she stopped paying. Utilities would shut off, accounts would default, and loans would need restructuring. But he was clear. She was not legally obligated to continue funding adults who were not her dependents. She asked what would happen if she sold things. He raised an eyebrow. That depends on what she wanted to sell. She left with a folder full of copies and a head full of possibilities that made her heart move faster than any dose of chemotherapy ever had. The scan results began to change in the weeks that followed. The doctor's expressions changed with them, less careful, more open. He started using words he had not reached for before. Responding, shrinking, promising. One afternoon he sat across from Zola with her chart open and said the tumors were decreasing. She blinked. She asked him to repeat it. He did. Adiz grabbed Zola's hand so hard she yelped, and then laughed, and then could not stop the tears from coming, pressing her forehead against Zola's shoulder, while Zola stared at the wall, trying to understand that she was not imagining any of this. It was not over. There was more treatment ahead, more scans to schedule, and no guarantees. But it was working. On the drive home, Zola's phone buzzed. Her mother asked her to check the utility account balance because something seemed off. Zola looked at the message. Then she locked the screen and set the phone face down on her lap. She leaned her head back against the seat. Outside, the city moved past the window in familiar shapes. And somewhere between one traffic light and the next, something shifted inside her. Something slow and irreversible, like a door she had been pressing shut for years finally, quietly opening. She did not go looking for confrontation. She did not send a long message full of accusations or arrange a meeting where everyone would say their piece. She simply began, small and deliberate, letting calls go to voicemail, pausing before she responded to requests, sitting with Adiz at the kitchen table, going through the lawyer's folder, separating what was genuinely her responsibility from what she had been carrying out of nothing but habit and guilt. Her name was on everything. The car Kofi drove was titled in her name alone. The savings accounts her parents drew from whenever they chose were opened and funded entirely by her. The deposit that had helped her parents move into their house. Her savings, withdrawn in one lump at a time when she had barely had enough. The apartment, her lease, her signature, her money, every month without fail. She called the lawyer again. This time, her voice barely shook. The car went first. A phone call, a confirmation, a signature. It was done in an afternoon. She sat afterwards staring at the wall, staggered by how quietly years of assumption could be erased. Then the accounts. 2 savings accounts transferred entirely into a new account bearing only her name. She watched the numbers appear on her screen and felt something loosening in her chest that she had not known was clenched. The apartment took longer. Inspections, listings, strangers walking through rooms she had never properly made her own because she had always been too busy paying for them to sit still in them. Adiz handled most of the conversations, sharp, patient, and impossible to rattle. When the first strong offer came in, Zola's phone had already started filling with missed calls. Kofi is messaging about the banking app, not recognizing his login. Nadia is sending question marks. Celestine asked why the car was no longer in the driveway. Zola waited until every sale was final, until every transfer had cleared, until there was nothing left to argue about. Then she sent one message to all of them. I sold the car. I closed the accounts. The apartment is under contract. 3 sentences. No explanation. She turned her phone off. The house was last, the place her parents had lived in, the one Zola had helped them into with a deposit large enough to wipe out everything she had managed to save at the time. Her name was tied to the loan. The lawyer had already confirmed she could force a sale. She sat with that for a long time. Adiz reminded her, quietly and without drama, that they had gone on vacation while Zola sat alone in a chemotherapy chair watching beach photos appear on her phone. The process began. By the time her family returned from their trip, the house was in escrow. The apartment was empty. The accounts were closed. And Zola was already gone. Not dramatically. She had packed slowly and deliberately over the course of a week, choosing what to carry the way you choose things when you finally accept that you cannot take everything with you, and that most of what you have been holding was never really yours to carry at all. She and Adiz rented a small place together, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen with cabinets that stuck if you did not pull them just right, and windows that let the morning light in so generously that the dust moved through it like something calm and unhurried. The first night, Zola lay on a mattress on the floor while her bed waited to be delivered, listening to Adiz move quietly in the room next door. She heard the soft sound of drawers opening and closing, the low hum of the old woman settling herself in. For the first time in years, that sound did not make Zola feel guilty for being looked after. It made her feel safe. Recovery did not arrive all at once. It came in small, quiet things that accumulated the way light does in the early morning, gradually, almost without your noticing, until at some point you realize the room is bright, and you cannot say exactly when that happened. Zola went an entire afternoon without checking her banking app out of fear. She sat in the sun with a book and stayed there for 2 hours without once reaching for her phone. She napped in the middle of the day without apologizing to anyone, not even herself. Her treatment continued to stabilize. The doctor's language shifted further. Remission was no longer a word wrapped in qualifiers. Adiz cooked too much and on purpose, and their little kitchen always smelt of onions and garlic and something simmering low on the stove. In the evenings, the two of them took short walks through the neighborhood, Adiz insisting on bringing a sweater for Zola even when the air was warm, both of them talking about ordinary things. What color to paint the bedroom, whether the bakery 2 streets over was worth trying, what flowers Adiz would grow on the windowsill when the season turned. One morning, Zola stood at the bathroom mirror brushing her teeth and caught her own reflection and stopped. The woman looking back was thinner, yes. Her hair was only just beginning to return, soft and new at the edges. But her eyes were different, clearer, lighter, like someone who had stopped bracing for the next blow and slowly, without even deciding to, had let her shoulders come down. She smiled at herself, tentatively at first, and then wider, and it felt like something she had forgotten she was allowed to do. Adiz knocked on the door and said breakfast was ready. Zola went out to the small kitchen and sat across from her grandmother at their table while the morning light stretched between them across the floor. She thought about how close she had come to never sitting in a moment like this one, quiet, unhurried, belonging entirely to her. The gratitude rose in her so suddenly it ached. She reached across the table and took the old woman's hand. Adiz squeezed back without looking up from her tea. She never needed words for the things that mattered most. And to everyone who has listened to Zola's story, to everyone who has ever been the dependable one, the strong one, the one who keeps saying yes long after the yes has cost them everything, hear this. Being needed is not the same as being loved. You deserve to be chosen, not because of what you provide, not because someone's life unravels the moment you stop, but simply because you exist, and that is enough. Do not forget that, even when the people who should remind you do not. And to everyone who has stayed with Zola's story until this very moment, thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for not looking away. Because if you are honest with yourself, you already know someone like Zola. Maybe you have sat at a table with her. Maybe you have called her at midnight knowing she would pick up. Maybe, and this is the hardest thing to say, maybe you are her. Maybe you are the one whose name is on everything. The one whose phone never stops. The one who tells you it is fine, it is love, it is what family does while your body quietly keeps the score. Zola's story did not begin with cancer. It began the first time she said yes when everything in her was exhausted and no one noticed enough to ask if she was sure. It began with small things that became permanent things. With thank yous that disappeared but requests that never did. And her healing did not begin in a hospital either. It began the moment one person, just one, showed up without being summoned, sat in an uncomfortable chair, held a hand that was shaking, and refused to leave. You do not need a grand gesture to start over. You do not need everyone to understand at once. You only need to be willing to look honestly at what you have been carrying, who has been helping you carry it, and who has simply been watching you carry it for them. Being needed is not the same as being loved. You deserve to be chosen. Fully. Quietly. Without having to earn it first. If Zola's story moved something in you today, do not let that feeling pass without doing something with it. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is running on empty and calling it strength. Someone who has not been asked how they are doing in longer than they can remember. And if that someone is you, this story was made for you. You are not alone. And you are not too far gone to begin again. If this story stayed with you, please give it a like. It helps more people find it who need it most. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. New ones come every week, and every single one is tailored for someone who needs to feel seen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That alone says something about who you are. We will see you in the next one.